Hey guys, Bowserkins here. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Tiermaker. I have the different class or different specialization set up here, and we're going to be discussing the tier sets for 9.2, the power that we can expect from them. Um, that's not the only thing that's playing into my fun little Tiermaker here. I'm also looking at the uniqueness of them, how they change your playstyle, if they're boring or not. It's largely based around power, but that's not the only thing we're considering here. Okay. All right. So, number one, I want to start out by saying that we're not going to be talking about every spec. Okay. So, if you're looking at an in depth analysis of your um, specialization, I actually recommend that you go to Wowhead's article about the different classes and tier set discussions. This is the Rogue one, for example. They have guide writers explaining each one. So if you're not entirely sure where your tier set is going to stand in terms of its power, I would heavily recommend that you go check out the guide writers on Wowhead. Um, these are written by real players who are very proficient in their specs, and they'll give you a good idea of where it stands right now um, in the very early stages of development, where the PTR hasn't even come out yet, right? Of course, it could come out here pretty soon, but we're still waiting to see if that happens. I'm recording this video shortly after the time of reset on Tuesday morning here in NA. So it could be coming out today. I would say that it's fairly likely it'll be coming out today. But let's go ahead and dive into this tier maker here. Okay. A few notes. Number one, really cool that there's no generic class buffs in these tier sets, right? So if you look at the different tier sets, like for Rogue, for example, just the two set here for Assassination, even though Shiv is technically something that you can use on all three specs, it's specific to um, assassination, right? It's giving you a debuff to cause your bleeds to gain 25% crit chance, right? That is obviously far more relevant for assassination than any other spec. If you go down here to Outlaw, your main gouge, which is a Outlaw specific passive, 25% chance to fire a pistol shot. Pistol shot, of course, being a Outlaw specific ability. So very cool. No generic um, boring class increases to abilities or anything. It's all spec specific. Pretty cool. Another note here: a few classes have a strong set bonus for every spec. If you just looking at my tier set here, you can see, you've got Holy Paladin here up in S tier, Prop Paladin down in A, right, and then Rets down here in C. Again, this is all subjective. This is just based off my opinion. This is not the de facto guide for how strong these things are. I highly suggest you check out the Wowhead articles if you want like a really in-depth guide. Excuse me, but um, from my own assessment, none of the classes have home runs on every spec, right? So like survival's up here, for example, and then BM and marksman are down here in B, right? However, there are some specs that have three somewhat weak, or two or three or however many um, weak specs. So it's hit or miss in terms of the weaknesses of some of the classes and in terms of their tier specs, but for the most part, there's no like overpowered hashtag biased um, classes going on with the tier sets. One of the things some bonuses desperately need a rework during the beta. We're going to go over a couple of those, but if you've checked out, your tier sets for your class and you're playing something like an unholy Decay or a holy priest or a frost Decay, we will talk a little bit about frost Decay later on. If you're playing those specs, or frost mage is another good one. If you're playing those specs, you're a little concerned, right? Because of the baseline fundamental approach to the tier set that those specs have um, is so flawed that Restoration Druid's another one. It's so flawed that they need to completely rethink the tier set in general, not just tweak the numbers, but actually just change it, right? And Windwalker is one of those as well. We'll talk about that later. All right, so some general takeaways from the tier set as you look at it. And again, this is based entirely off my opinion. Is the tank sets are largely balanced except for Brewmaster, right? So for me, I have Blood Decay, I have Prop Paladin, I have Guardian Druid, and I have Vengeance DH all up in A tier. We'll go over a couple of those. A couple of them we're pretty much going to ignore today. Guardian and Vengeance, for example, just have really strong powers, but they're also not entire. They're not super interesting to talk about. Prop Paladin is just we're not going to talk about that today. It's largely based around your block, and it's going to be extremely strong if the current iteration of it is similar to how it goes live in 9.2. Yeah, and then way down here is Brewmaster, right? Prot Warrior's up in it's B tier. The thing is, if you're a Prot Warrior, depending on how you feel about this tier set, again, this is deeply subjective. It could be up in S tier, it could be down in F tier. It's just one of those things. Obviously, until we get our hands on it, we can test this out. I do have a Prot Warrior that I'm going to play on some PTR keys. I'm not going to know for sure how powerful it is, but we will talk about how cool it is here towards the end because it is um, one of the more unique sets. So yeah, and then from that healer sets, contrary to the tank specs where most of them are strong and then there's one weak one, the healer specs are mostly weak and then there's one really strong one, right? So the ones that come to mind immediately for the weak ones, Resto Druid, Mistweaver Monk, Resto Shaman. Resto Shamans could potentially be it could be strong, especially in Mythic Plus, but it's plagued by the exact same issue that Resto Druid has. They're the exact same thing in the sense that they're forcing you to use a spell in the tier. Like the tier set is wholly focused around a spell that people who play this spec don't use a lot. So it's very strange. And I understand why Blizzard's doing that, and that's why I'm saying like they don't. I mean, Resto Shaman, I would say, doesn't need a rework in its fundamental approach. I think it just needs to be tweaked a bit, and the tweaking is actually just going to be. We can pull it up here. Um, right now, the chain heals are reducing the cooldown of your Spirit Link Totem. If they just change this to where it's reducing the cooldown of anything other than Spirit Link Totem, I think this 4-piece is actually, and the set bonus in general is actually pretty cool. I think a lot of people are getting hung up on this part specifically, and that can be frustrating. Because Spirit Link Totem, when you're on raid, for example, most people who are like organized and running a raid team, they're gonna want to have Spirit Link Totem assigned to certain mechanics. And generally you're not gonna want to rely on crits from one ability to reduce the cooldown that you're planning to use. Um, it's very RNG. It's not you can't plan it to the second, and that's why it's very nerve wracking to say, okay, we're going to anticipate that Spirit Link Totem is 2 minutes and 30 seconds from now because he's going to crit a bunch with chain heal. Right? It's not a safe way to plan. So that's why Resto Shaman's down here. I don't think it needs to rework entirely. I think it just needs to be changed off Spirit Link Totem. Resto Druid, I do think basing everything off Swiftmend is weird. And I think that either the tier set needs to be changed or Swiftmend needs to be changed. It can't be it can't be like under its current iteration, Swiftmend is very awkward to use, especially in raid. And the tier set makes it even more awkward. We'll go over why in a little bit. All right, so let's start off in S tier. The ones worthy of note here: Holy Paladin, Destro Warlock. We've got Survival Hunter and Windwalker Monk. Obviously, really cool to see Survival Hunter up here, and somewhat insulting to see Windwalker, which is already dominant, be up here in the top at S. Now, this is based largely off of numbers. One thing to talk about Windwalker on is, and we'll go over this here in a couple of minutes, Um, this is the Windwalker set for people who haven't seen it. Pull it up here. Um, it's the 4 pieces that's causing the issues, right? That's Mistweaver. What am I doing? After 10 offensive abilities, your next 3 offensive abilities deal an additional 22% damage. Um, this is obviously an issue because it's just 10 offensive abilities, right? Um, this is going to incentivize some degenerate gameplay. So we'll talk about that more in depth here in a couple of minutes. But specs for Spotlight here. I want to talk about a couple specializations specifically. The one at the very top here, the one that I think is the most powerful, it not only has to do with the power of the tier set, but also how powerful the spec already is. So Holy Paladin is looking really strong. And the reason is because, quite simply, um, it's going to extend the duration of, or excuse me, it's going to reduce the remaining cooldown of Avenging Wrath. You're going to have more Avenging Wrath up. Holy Paladin is already absolutely crushing every other healer in damage, especially in a raid setting when you're running Venthyr. But overall, in general, now Kirian Shaman has closed the gap a little bit in Mythic Plus, but you're still, if you're looking for the most damage, the absolute most damage out of a healer, it's going to be Holy Paladin, right? Holy Paladin's broken, and this just accentuates the issue. It makes it much worse, and I'm not excited about Holy Paladin gaining this much more power. I mean, you're talking about reducing the remaining cooldown of Avenging Wrath by 2 seconds by each target hit by your Light of Dawn. It's going to be a considerable amount of cooldown reduction on a 3 minute cooldown that was already really strong. And you're talking about getting, Avenging Wrath. Um, you don't even sit on this um, for Ashen Hollow, right? You're going to get 2 of these before Ashen Hollow comes out. So very strong. And then of course they're buffing the healing. Light of Dawn will heal for 50% more and cast twice. When you use Word of Glory, the next one will do this, and then cannot occur more than once every 30 seconds. It really doesn't need to. I mean, really, what's going to happen is you're going to cast Word of Glory, and then you're going to follow that up with the Light of Dawn in situations where you recognize that it's necessary, and it's going to be extremely strong. And what's really interesting is it's going to synergize with Shadowbreaker, Dawn of the Sun. This is mentioned in the guide writer thing here. I hadn't thought about this before, but it's interesting that this guide writer brought it up, because it's true, right? It's going to synergize extremely well with this. I don't think that people will actually opt out of running their current damage legendary, but I mean, if you're looking for massive throughput, especially in raid, when you're not so worried about the Mythic Plus damage and all that stuff, you could actually just run Shadowbreaker. I don't think it'll be a thing, but it could be. And it's always cool if other legendaries are brought into play as a possibility. It's not so great when they feel mandatory after a tier set's implemented, kind of like what is going to be taking place with a few of these specs for sure. Excuse me, I got a little bit of a cough today. All right, another spec for Spotlight here is Survival Hunter. So when I first saw the Survival Hunter spec, I thought it was absolutely crazy. Um, and I don't think, I mean, you can see how long it takes this dual B guy to talk about this tier set bonus. I mean, look at this wall of text. And it's completely justified. If you're a survival hunter and you want to look through all of this, go ahead. And again, we're going to be handing out some awards to some of these tier sets as they're initially designed. Survival Hunter is the winner of one of them. It's going to be pretty obvious when I mention it. So the actual tier set here, when kill command resets, it has a 40% chance to make your next wildfire bomb incur no cooldown. Now this is amazing for a number of reasons, but specifically in Mythic Plus, when your kill command resets, um, which happens fairly often, especially if you're running guerrilla tactics, right? If it interacts with guerrilla tactics on your pheromone bomb, You're gonna get kill command resets constantly, and you're just gonna be hurling bombs nonstop into the pack. I don't know if that's how that will work, but man, if it does, that's gonna be absolutely insane. And I don't think that they will have it work that way by the time it goes live after some of the damage numbers come out. Unless they're like, dude, it's time for the year of the spear. It wasn't 2021, it was 2022. And they actually let this loose with the pheromone bomb resets. I think they talk about it here in the guide writer thing. Yeah, pheromone bomb right here. I didn't read the survival one. I play survival hunter a little bit here and there, and I already drew the conclusion with the pheromone bomb. And it looks like this is certainly mentioned because literally when you hit something with a pheromone bomb as a survival hunter, every time you kill command, it'll reset kill command. So you're talking about using kill command, then a bomb, kill command, then a bomb, kill command, then a bomb, back and again and again and again, back and forth constantly, and that's pretty crazy. In addition to that, your wildfire bombs deal 30% additional damage. So on top of your wildfire bombs, which are already doing a ton of damage, especially if you're running the legendary Wildfire Cluster, or I think that's what it's called. Yeah, Wildfire Cluster right here, which is totally insane. You're getting a 30% additional damage. This bonus is increased to 80% for bombs empowered by a Mad Bombardier, which means they were reset to do the no cooldown. So, I mean, again, I this seems like it will break Mythic Plus, right? So, absolutely crazy to think about. So that's why that's up in S tier. If you're wondering why the heck I'm seeing Survival Hunter up there, it's because it's actually insane how it's iterated upon right now. And we'll see if that changes down the road. I anticipate it will, or there'll be some kind of internal cooldown or a restriction, so that you can't constantly reset bombs. Maybe set a like a 20-second cooldown, like hey, this is going to happen every 20 seconds. It'd be kind of lame if that happened, but from Blizzard's perspective, you have to balance the spec so that everyone's not rolling Survival Hunter if they don't want to, right? Because it sucks to be forced into a spec. Like if you're playing Hunter and you're trolling if you're not playing Survival or any other spec for any other class, that feels really bad, right? All right, Blood Decay. I don't have this one up here, so bear with me. I wanted to talk about this for a second, and why I have it up in high A tier. So we've learned a little bit about this tier set and how it's going to synergize pretty well, um, because of a couple of things. But namely, oop, sorry about that. Move that window in there without realizing it. Um, so the Heart Strikes will increase your strength by 1% and the duration of dancing by 0.5 seconds. And the strength is going to persist for a while. And then parring attack causes your weapon to lash out, heart striking your attacker. When I first analyzed this tier set, for whatever reason, I thought that the parrying an attack and getting the heart strikes out of it was only going to be relevant during dancing rune weapon. So you'd pop dancing weapon, and then the parries that you got would heart strike, right? That's not the case. It's literally just whenever you parry, even outside of when you have dancing weapon up. Now, naturally, DKs have about 20-25% parry, walking into a pole with no strength buffs or anything, right? So roughly 1 out of every 4 autos that you're going to be hit with, you're going to get heart strike. And there's some really interesting questions. And again, wall of text for Blood Decay here. There's some really interesting questions as to how this heart strike is going to interact. Will it give bonus RP when it hits from the parry, right? Or will it count as like kind of how your dancing rune weapon acts, as though it's not actually you doing the heart strike, so you don't get the RP. If you get the RP, this is an S. This is an S tier, right? Even if you don't get the RP, it's still an A. Maybe a low A, possibly a high B, okay? But it's probably still an A tier set bonus. But if you get the RP from the Heart Strikes and they synergize with your Heartbreaker talent, which I think is discussed in this Yeah, right here. So Heart Strike generates 2 additional runic power per target hit, right? That's a talent that you pick on your first row. It's largely considered the go-to pick for Mythic Plus and some raid encounters, because the only other viable option on that row is the Bloodsucker talent that I constantly forget the name of because I never take it. Never take it because I rarely raid on Blood Decay. I'm only running Mythic Plus, so it's always Heartbreaker for me. Okay, so um, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether this actually gives the RP and whether it gets the bonus RP from the talent. If this is if this counts as you heart striking the opponent and you get the bonus RP from your paris, I mean, I don't think it'll work that way, but if it does, you're going to have an absolute metric ton of RP constantly, right? Which is why I don't think it's going to work that way. I think it's going to count as your weapon technically doing it, and you're not doing it. In addition to that, Dancing Weapon will now summon 2 rune weapons. This is it'll largely, you know, it'll function as a damage increase. This is not the part of the 4-piece that people are getting pogs about. It's about the parrying, causing heart strikes, right? On top of that, there's also an interesting question as to whether the heart strike damage or the strength bonus from the heart strike is one thing, but will the auto heart strikes from Pari affect the Night Fae Death's Due mechanic? Because when you're standing in your Death's Due as a Night Fae Blood Decay, when you heart strike, you get a buff called Death's Due. It increases your strength and it also reduces the damage of your enemy. So, will the heart strikes from this also apply to those stacks? If so, it's difficult to imagine that you're not going to have a reason even to heart strike while inside of your Death's Due. So it'll introduce a lot of weird situations where um like you don't ever have to worry about heart striking while Death's Due is up. So and if that is true, Night Fae Blood Decay, considering the pure amount of strength you're going to get, and a near constant basis, is Night Fae might actually just make it the default choice in 9.2, which is really strange to say. So blood really high. Another thing we wanted to touch on is Fury Warrior. And again, I don't think I have that one. We're just gonna click off of the rogue one because we won't be talking about rogues except for in passing. A couple of comments about them. I want to talk about Fury Warrior because the Fury Warrior one, in my opinion, is really interesting and how I believe a tier set should be approached from a DPS perspective. I think this is one of, even though it's technically in the B tier for me, it's one of the better designed tier sets. It has solid synergies. I will. It does cause one unfortunate issue, yeah, right here with cruelty, which is already considered more or less the go-to talent. And after this tier set comes out, nobody's gonna talent away from cruelty unless they're trolling, right? Because what cruelty does is, while enraged, Raging Blow deals 20% more damage and has a 30% chance to instantly reset its own cooldown, right? And you're talking about, a tier set that's based entirely around Raging Blow. And there's also Hack and Slash having an interesting interaction as well. Um, but overall, it's really cool, right? Because you're talking about a baseline ability that you're going to use anyway, but it's doing cool things. So it's getting an additional point of damage and it's getting an additional charge. The damage part is boring. Whenever you add an additional charge to an ability, it's always cool, right? It's this across the board. It's always cool if you just get extra uses of an ability that you like to push. And although Raging Blow is not super satisfying, it's going to be turned into something that's satisfying because of the 4-piece, right? So Raging Blow has a 20% chance to grant Recklessness for 4 seconds. Now, with some of these tier set bonuses, you'll notice the 2 set is pretty boring. And realistically, as we go into 9.2, the fact of the matter is some people are going to be sitting on a 2 set for weeks, potentially weeks, depending on how the legendary crafting system or the tier set crafting system works, how long it'll actually take to obtain your 4 set bonus, whether it's something they do quickly or it actually takes you a little while to get the 4 pieces. That's up for debate. Um, But the 2-piece will feel relatively meh, and then the 4-piece is going to unlock the true power of how cool it is. Because I mean, your Raging Blow is going to have a 20% chance to grant Recklessness for 4 seconds. That's pretty darn strong. So something that I wanted to spotlight here is how volatile Fury Warrior is going to be moving forward with the auto attack buff that it got in 9.1.5, and now this buff to Raging Blow and the increased uptime of Recklessness, along with the double legendary possibilities. You could see a Fury Warrior spike to the top in melee DPS specs. All right, now for the negative part of the spotlight. I want to talk about Brewmaster. As you can see, Brewmaster I have down here in the middling part, upper part of D. You can easily move it, down here if you want. I don't think it's as bad as these 2 Shaman specs. I put Ellie Shaman down here. It could be in terms of power up into C or B, but it's so incredibly poorly designed that I put it down in D just for that matter. And there are a couple of other things like um, Shadow Priest could potentially be quite strong, but it's so poorly designed because it's purely single target that I put it down in D. It could be an absolute monster in single target, but we don't know yet. But yeah, talking about Brewmaster here. So just to go over the set, targets ignited by Breath of Fire deal an additional 4% less damage to you. Now, at face value, this is incredibly boring, and I got to tell you, there's nothing to make this less boring. There's no way to, um, make it exciting, right? It's just how it is. It's a 4% additional damage reduction from Breath of Fire. Now, I will say, and actually, yeah. So the guide writer says right here, the 2-piece bonus is genuinely decent. It's boring, but it's okay. Honestly, if he just written this and then moved on to the 4-piece wherever he talks about it, GG. So if you're running Charred Passions, Breath of Fire is roughly 100% uptime. So it is comparable to defense to a defense only 8% versatility buff. So, it's okay. It's just incredibly boring. But the Breath of Fire empowers your next Tiger Palm or Blackout Kick, increasing your shuffle duration and brew cooldown reduction by 100%. That is staggeringly bad for a number of reasons. One, in AoE situations, you don't really want to use Tiger Palm and Blackout Kick. I mean, you're still going to use it, but it's not amazing. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to want to use Spinning Crane Kick. Blackout Kick is here few and far between. And to add insult to injury, shuffle duration does not matter. I mean, when have you ever not had shuffle up in the middle of a fight? The actual duration of shuffle is completely irrelevant. I mean, it's so bad that I'm hoping that this is a typo, right? I'm hoping that it's shuffle effectiveness and brew cooldown reduction, because the duration has absolutely no relevance. This is dead text. But the brew cooldown reduction by 100% is a thing. I will say, if you're efficiently using your purifying brews, this is not going to help a ton either. It will help a little bit, especially in really high strain situations in Mythic Plus, or if you're taking large repetitive damage in raid that you can't avoid. This can be helpful. And then, of course, the bonuses that it gives you to cooling down your Fort Brew and your Celestial Brew is definitely valuable. But if you actually break it down in a 6 to 10 minute boss fight, you're only going to get 2 or 3 additional uses based on the math that I've seen. So the actual benefit this has to Celestial Brew, for example, is actually quite minimal. So overall, very weak tier set. The 2-piece is a good start. I would say that it's on the boring side, but we see other ones that are boring that'll do. And I think that the 2-piece opens up the possibility that more people will play Charred Passions in Mythic Plus because it gives more damage or has the chance of doing more damage. And if you're looking at additional damage reduction, then it might be just perfectly in line with Storm Stout's Last Cake, and that's pretty cool. But again, it's going to be heavily dependent on whether they actually change this four piece, because as far as I can tell, just how it looks, this actually needs to be reworked. I think is a fundamentally flawed approach to the four piece bonus. So hopefully this is changed. Another one that falls in that same category is, unfortunately, the Resto Druid set. Let me go ahead and pull up Druid here. All right, so Restoration Druid is, again, a fundamentally flawed tier set. And the reason it's fundamentally flawed is because of how Swiftman has been changed in Shadowlands. Now, I will say, I do play some Resto Druid, but I read this multiple times. And again, please check out this article here, written by a person named Jada, if you want to get a better understanding of how this tier set sucks. Because when I looked at it the first time, I knew it sucked. But this Jada does a really good idea of explaining exactly why this tier set feels bad and why it should be changed. Or alternatively, why Swiftmen should be changed. And the main takeaways from it are the following. So Swiftmen, right off the bat, is not something that people like to use as much as they used to. Its cooldown is reduced from 25 seconds to 15 seconds, but now it goes back to absorbing a heal over time effect in order to be used on a target. Now you can negate that by taking the legendary, that makes it to where it doesn't consume a heal over time effect when you use it, but that legendary is generally considered a single target healing, and it's not going to make this tier set better. It's just going to fix a problem that I think should not exist in the first place. If Blizzard's not willing to take away the consume a heal over time effect thing from Swiftmen in 9.2, if they're not willing to make that edit, then they have to edit how this works. So if you're going to incentivize people to push Swiftmen, you need to have it increase your follow-up healing. You need it to act as if it's a cooldown in itself. Now, this is already done in part thanks to Soul of the Forest, which makes so basically Swiftman increases the healing of your next regrowth or rejuve by 200% or your next wild growth by 75%. Now, this is the less likely of the options, right? Because you already have Soul of the Forest, and people play this talent. You know, it's not something everyone uses because you have to give up your tree form, your incarnation, to pick this talent. But people do play it, especially in Mythic Plus when they are using the Swiftman Lego, right? So I think that the more likely and certainly more apt edit to Swiftman, even though I don't think it's going to happen, is to remove the heal over time effect and balance the legendary that already gives you that option accordingly, so that it's not worthless, right? But until they do that, it's basically going to be left with a situation where you kind of wish you were always playing with the Swiftmen Lego, as you have to consume potentially a really strong heal over time effect in order to even use Swiftman to get this tier set going. So fundamentally flawed approach to a tier set, in my opinion. All right. So I talked about the awards. Let's go over those, and then we're going to close out the video. So most boring. There's some real front runner candidates for this. I decided to give it to Frost Decay, and the reason that I gave it to Frost Decay is because the two piece just granting you 8% crit, but it's not even you just get 8% crit. It's during Remorseless Winter. So I'm not necessarily sure how much crit you would have to gain from Remorseless Winter on this two piece to make this not boring. But Remorseless Winter is a 20-second cooldown and it's up for 8 seconds, right? So a little less, it's about 40%, obviously, right? 40% uptime on 8% crit on a two set is tragic. And it's tragic because Frost Decay doesn't even care all that much about crit. It's certainly nice, and there are some benefits to having crit as a Frost Decay. But Mastery would have been way better. Considering Remorseless Winter is benefiting from your Mastery, if Remorseless Winter was giving you Mastery while active, it would be far, far better than a crit bonus, right? And then the 4 set, Consuming Killing Machine fires a Glacial Advance through your target. Again, this is largely boring. A, because the Glacial Advance damage, the actual damage of Glacial Advance is quite low, so this is unexciting. And I can imagine that it's going to be even more unexciting in raiding when this is not doing a lot of damage. So, very unfortunate. Mythic Plus, this could actually be pretty strong, but again, most boring, Frost Decay. And we also talked about Brewmaster. I also think the Brewmaster one is quite boring. Unless they tweak the numbers here and the cooldown reduction is increased significantly, and you end up with like machine gun celestial brews, that could actually be really fun. Or they increase the effectiveness of shuffle, and along with the DR of Breath of Fire, you just become an absolute machine. That could be pretty cool too. Which is honestly what I think Brewmaster needs. Brewmaster just needs to be able to sit in the pole longer than they do right now. So buffing the effectiveness of shuffle and reducing the cooldown of celestial brew would be a really, really good way of fixing some of the issues with Brewmaster Monk that makes them kite constantly. Okay, most exciting. We already went over this one. It's a slam dunk, obvious choice. It's got to be Survival Hunter, right? The wall of text here, I read through part of it right before I did this video. Again, didn't read all of it. Didn't need to. I already knew this was insane. This is an absolute banger of a tier set. An absolute banger of a tier set. The numbers could change, but the fundamental approach to this is amazing. Kill command resets cause you to throw out free wildfire bombs. The wildfire bombs do more damage, and the resets do even more damage. Bombs are amazing. It's the best part of Survival Hunter. Absolute S plus tier set bonus. Right? Amazing. Absolutely just so exciting. Most concerning, and again, we're going to go right back to Monk again. If you're, and I only play Brewmaster, okay, and I don't play it a lot, so don't think that I'm just bringing this up. And I could trash Mistweaver all day, every day. We have a Mistweaver in our push group. I feel awful for. That's an F tier as well. If you're looking for a competitive option for most boring, it's this. Honestly, the tuning of the rune that comes from Mistweaver will determine whether this is going to be good or not. And I don't suspect that the rune that drops that increases your healing is going to be worth it. Because you're going to have to stand in one space. Monks don't like to stand in one spot. But in terms of most concerning, it's Windwalker. All right. And it has nothing to do with the two piece. Fist of Fury, damage increase, whatever. That actually kind of needed to happen. Fist of Fury, in my opinion, from what I've seen, a person in our push group plays Windwalkers and all. The actual Fists of Fury damage. It's such a cool ability. I'm just weirded out by the fact that it doesn't do more damage than it does, and increasing it by 40%, in my opinion, really smart decision. Again, they need to do tuning to make sure Windwalker doesn't get out of control. The most concerning is the 4 piece. This is a huge concern for one specific issue. If you're trying to get to the 10 offensive abilities to use your most powerful ones for the 3, you could end up doing some really degenerate crap, right? Like casting something and saying like 3 Tiger Palms, even though it would be awful for you, just so that you can get your 3 offensive abilities to be, Fists of Fury, followed by Whirling Dragon Punch, and then and Rising Sun Kick. They actually go over it here. So 22% more damage is a lot of damage, especially if you can make those 3 offensive abilities: Rising Sun Kick, Whirling Dragon Punch, Fist of Fury, or a fully stacked Spinning Crane Kick. Right, 100% agree there. How degenerate will this tuning be? If it's 22% additional damage, turns out to be absolutely insane when buffing these key abilities. How far are you going to be willing to go with these 10 offensive abilities before these 3 in order to get the damage buff? Because if it's a little bit of an increase, some people are going to do it, right? I also think that this set bonus favors high end players a lot more because they're going to be able to set up like degenerate weak auras and just have an insane amount of tuning involved and trying to make sure they can squeeze as much bonus out of this as possible. Whereas the average Joe will just be using 10 abilities and the next three of 22% more damage, right? So it's fundamentally flawed in the way that it's being built. I would like to see this number reduced. So instead of 10 offensive abilities, preferably like 6 or 7, and then makes your next 2 offensive abilities maybe, and then maybe reduce this damage. And it would still be a fun tier set, because you're using abilities and then you're buffing other ones, and you could still get the additional damage for these abilities, but there wouldn't be as much planning involved when you have to have fewer offensive abilities before you use the next three. Because here, I mean, with 10, you could end up doing some really weird stuff in order to get the three empowered, So that's very concerning. I wouldn't say that it's obviously I've got it in S tier, right? Because it looks like for that, at least for the high end players or people who play their class well, um, the Windwalker monks who can best utilize this bonus are going to get massive damage increases from it, right? Okay, most unique, and this video is lasting forever. Most unique goes to the Prot Warrior fam. This is an absolute banger of a bonus. So when I put it in the tier set, I put it in B, like low B, and that's because I don't know what the tuning is going to look like. I don't know if these numbers will change, if they'll stay the same. So I put it in B tier because it looks like, just from first impressions, that the tier set is fairly weak. Okay, but um, I don't know, right? Because the 4-piece, it's going to give you an additional 10% damage for your avatar. It's already 20%, now it'll be 30. It's going to reduce your damage taken by 10%. That 4-piece is actually quite strong, especially when you're running anger management. So I might have this underrated. It might be up here with Blood Decay and Prot Paladin. I don't actually know. It's going to largely be based on this 2-set piece, right? Because we know the 4-set piece is pretty solid. It's not amazing, it's solid. But in order to get 8 stacks of Outburst outside of when you use your avatar, right? Because that's part of the 4-set bonus. Outside of that, you're going to have to spend 240 Rage in order to get an empowered Shield Slam, Thunderclap, or Ignore Pain. Now, Ignore Pain doing 50% more, having 50% more effectiveness, it's going to be interesting if that actually affects. It's going to be interesting to see if this actually affects the talent that you can take. I forget what it's called, but it also buffs your Ignore Pain based on your amount of missing health, right? I suspect that it will. Okay. Now, again, this is the one that I am absolutely most unsure about. And that's why I think it's really unique because, if you can get that 240 rage spent faster than I think you can, um, we could see Prot Warrior in S, right? We could see this as a resurgence to Prot Warrior. And a lot of Prot Warriors that I know, I play Prot Warrior as well, really like this set. And why wouldn't you? It's absolutely fun. It's very exciting. I wouldn't say it's the most exciting. Again, the Survival Hunter one was totally insane. But this is second place for most exciting, and it's definitely the most unique, right? I mean, this outburst mechanic is completely unique to the expansion. We've never seen something like this before. So, hats off to the person at Blizzard or people at Blizzard who designed this tier set. If the tuning on this puts them in line with everyone else and it's balanced well, then perfect. Because the 4 set is already, that's already solid, right? Getting additional damage and DR from Avatar, which is already your most powerful cooldown, being able to reduce that cooldown through anger management talent, um, and then this very satisfying outburst stack thing, making your next shield slam, thunderclap, or ignore pain be an absolute truck. I mean, the guide writer, I didn't read this, but based on the initial, I mean, look at, man, this guy's got caps in the chat. You know what I mean? Like, he's got to be hype. This set is great! Exclamation point. Um, but he's right. Both bonuses add fun gameplay interactions. It's true. It's 100% true. This is a fun tier set. So if you're prop warrior, you're not feeling too bad. Again, I mean, honestly, after reading it again, I think low B was probably too low. Maybe I put it in A tier. We're gonna have to see though, fam. I mean, we're gonna see where the tuning is here on the prop warrior thing. But again, this is all subjective. I could be wrong about every single thing. I will address this video in 9.2 and see how completely ridiculous I was. Of course, I expect a lot of balancing to happen between then and now. But yeah, this has been Bowserkins checking out the tier sets. I hope you enjoyed the tier maker here. Feel free to write down in the comments about how ridiculous and dumb I am. I always appreciate the comments. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. It helps me out a ton. I'm trying to get this fledgling video off the ground, and subscriptions and likes to my videos is going to help out a ton, guys. So I really appreciate every single one of them. You guys have a great one, and I'll talk to you next time. See you.